Sometimes the most dangerous betrayal comes from the person you trust most. When night security guard Cal Grant discovers hidden cameras in billionaire Evelyn Locke's penthouse, he faces an impossible choice: stay silent and keep his job, or risk everything to warn the woman who owns his world. Cal has been scraping by as a single father, working the graveyard shift at Skycrest Towers just to put food on the table for his 10-year-old son Sam. Evelyn Locke is the heiress who owns the building and everything in it, including the life Cal has built in its shadow. But when Cal spots that tiny red light blinking in her private hallway, he knows someone is watching her every move. The cameras aren't part of the building's security system, and they're aimed at places where the billionaire should feel safest. When Cal finds the courage to approach Evelyn with 4 simple words, "Ma'am, you're being recorded," he sets in motion a chain of events that will expose her fiance's real intentions and reveal a conspiracy that reaches far beyond hidden cameras. But will the truth about Victor Hale's betrayal destroy Evelyn's faith in love forever? Or will it lead her to discover that sometimes the most genuine connection comes from the most unexpected place? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's harsh buzz cut through the pre-dawn darkness at 4:30 a.m. But Cal Grant was already awake, staring at the water stain on his bedroom ceiling that had grown 3 inches since winter began. In the next room, Sam's gentle breathing provided the only sound that mattered in their small 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city, where the rent was cheap and the walls were thin enough to hear Mrs. Chun's television through the plaster. Cal's feet hit the cold linoleum floor with practiced silence. 12 years of military service had taught him to move without sound, a skill that served him well now in civilian clothes. Navigating around the creaky floorboard by Sam's door and the pile of construction paper and crayons that never quite made it back to the kitchen table. The drawings scattered across their makeshift art station told stories of rockets soaring past castle towers, knights riding dinosaurs, and stick figures labeled Dad and Me standing in front of what looked like the world's most optimistic interpretation of their humble apartment. Those drawings would travel with Cal to work each night, carefully folded and tucked into his security jacket pocket, then spread across the small desk in the Skycrest Tower security office like a gallery of hope. Sam's latest masterpiece, a crayon rendering of a man in a uniform, standing guard over a magnificent castle, held the place of honor, taped to the wall beside Cal's punch clock, where he could see it every time he signed in for another shift. Coffee maker gurgled to life as Cal moved through his morning routine with the efficiency of a man who had learned to make every minute count. Toast, peanut butter, a packed lunch that would see him through the long hours until dawn. In the distance, the city was waking up in Layer's delivery trucks, rumbling through streets still slick with dew. Early commuters beginning their pilgrimage to office buildings that scraped the sky. And somewhere across town, in a penthouse that cost more per month than Cal made in a year, Evelyn Locke was probably just settling into sleep after another evening of charity galas and business dinners. Cal had worked security at Skycrest Towers for 3 years, long enough to know the rhythm of the building's heartbeat, the late-night arrivals in town cars that whispered against the cobblestone drive, the soft chime of the private elevator that served only the penthouse floors, the way the lobby's marble surfaces caught and reflected the city lights filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. He knew which residents tipped generously at Christmas and which ones looked through him like he was part of the furniture. He knew the building's secrets, which apartments had been empty for months while their owners traveled, which marriages were holding together by nothing more than public appearances, which successful careers were built on foundations less solid than they appeared. But Evelyn Locke remained something of a mystery, even after 3 years of nodding politely when their paths crossed in the lobby. She was unfailingly courteous, always remembering his name, sometimes asking about Sam when she'd seen the boy's drawings during her rare visits to the security office. There was a sadness in her eyes that money couldn't quite mask, a loneliness that seemed to follow her through the building's elegant corridors, like a shadow she couldn't shake Dot at 28. She had inherited Locke Industries from her father, a shipping empire built over 4 generations that now employed thousands and moved cargo across 3 continents. The business magazines called her a visionary, praising her expansion into renewable energy and sustainable shipping practices. But Cal saw her in unguarded moments returning from board meetings, with shoulders that carried more weight than any 28-year-old should bear, standing at the lobby windows at 3 in the morning, looking out at a city that sparkled, but offered no warmth that her engagement to Victor Halle 6 months ago had surprised no one in the social circles that tracked such things. Victor was everything that tabloids expected Harvard-educated, old family money, a smile that photographed, well at charity events. He was a venture capitalist who specialized in technology startups, with offices in 3 cities and a reputation for turning promising ideas into profitable realities. On paper, he was perfect for someone like Evelyn, a match that made sense in the way that business mergers make sense. Cal had met Victor perhaps a dozen times during his evening rounds, usually when the man was arriving for dinner or leaving early the next morning. He was polite enough, though there was something in his manner that reminded Cal of certain officers. He'd known in the Army men who were comfortable giving orders, but had never learned to listen. Victor had a way of looking at people like Cal as if they were useful but temporary, components in a machine that could be replaced without much thought. The engagement had been announced with all the fanfare befitting Evelyn's position in society. There had been a party at the Metropolitan Club, photographs in the society pages, and enough flowers delivered to the penthouse to stock a small greenhouse. The wedding was planned for the spring, with preparations already underway for what promised to be the social event of the season. But lately, Cal had noticed changes in the building's rhythm. Victor's visits had become more frequent, his stays longer. There had been workmen in the penthouse during odd hours, men who claimed to be updating the security system or improving the internet infrastructure. They carried themselves with the casual confidence of people who belonged, but something about their presence set Cal's instincts humming with the kind of alertness that had kept him alive during 2 tours overseas, the commute to Skycrest Towers took 45 minutes on the subway, followed by a 10-minute walk through the kind of neighborhood where every building looked like it had been designed by someone who understood that money could buy more than shelter. It could buy the illusion of permanence, of belonging to something larger and more enduring than the struggles of ordinary life. The towers themselves rose 63 stories into the sky, a monument to ambition and achievement that dominated the city's skyline, like a gleaming middle finger extended toward the heavens. Cal's shift began at 6 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. 12 hours of walking predetermined routes, monitoring security cameras, and maintaining the careful balance between vigilance and invisibility that good security required. He knew every inch of the building's public spaces, every corner where shadows gathered, every sightline that mattered. The basement levels held parking garages and mechanical rooms, service corridors that connected the building's vital systems, like arteries in a body. The middle floors housed offices and smaller residential units, places where success was measured in 6 figures rather than 8. And at the top, the penthouse levels where the truly wealthy lived lives, insulated from the concerns that kept ordinary people awake at night. Sam would be getting ready for school now, probably standing in front of their bathroom mirror practicing the presentation he'd been working on about the solar system. Cal had helped him build a model of Jupiter from paper match, complete with painted storm systems and a collection of moons that wobbled on toothpick axes. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, created in the space between Cal's shifts, when exhaustion gave way to the simple joy of watching his son discover the world. The boy had been only 6 when his mother died, old enough to understand that she wasn't coming back, but too young to fully grasp the permanence of loss. In the 4 years since, Cal had learned to be both father and mother, teacher and student, the strong foundation upon which Sam could build his dreams of rockets and castles and adventures that stretched beyond the boundaries of their small apartment. Every evening, as Cal prepared for another night of walking empty hallways and monitoring silent screens, he carried with him the knowledge that his work here was more than just a job. It was the bridge between the life he was living and the life he wanted to build for Sam, a future where a boy's dreams weren't limited by the size of his father's paycheck or the neighborhood where he happened to grow up. The security office occupied a corner of the building's ground floor, tucked away behind the main lobby where residents and visitors wouldn't have to acknowledge its existence unless absolutely necessary. It was a small space, barely large enough for a desk, a bank of monitors, and a chair that had seen better decades. But Cal had made it his own over the years, adding Sam's drawings to the walls, keeping a small coffee maker and a selection of books that helped pass the quiet hours between rounds. Tonight felt different, though he couldn't quite name the source of his unease. There was something in the air, a tension that seemed to emanate from the building's upper floors, like heat rising from summer pavement. As he settled into his chair and began the evening's first review of the security monitors, Cal allowed himself a moment to wonder what Evelyn Locke was doing 60 floors above his head, and whether she ever looked down at the city lights and wondered about the lives being lived in the spaces between the buildings. In the apartments where children drew pictures of castles and fathers worked night shifts to keep the lights on, monitors showed the usual collection of empty hallways, vacant lobbies, and parking garages where expensive cars waited for their owners to return from whatever important business occupied the wealthy after dark. Everything appeared normal, routine, exactly as it should be. But Cal had learned to trust his instincts, and tonight those instincts were telling him that something was about to change, that the careful balance he'd maintained between his world and Evelyn's was about to be tested in ways he couldn't yet imagine. In his pocket, Sam's latest drawing rustled softly as he shifted in his chair, a reminder of what mattered most and what he was willing to risk to protect it. The discovery came during Cal's 2 a.m. rounds, when the building settled into its deepest quiet, and even the city's restless energy seemed to pause for breath. He was walking the 47th floor, checking doors and ensuring the hallway cameras were functioning properly, when a glint of red caught his peripheral vision. It was tiny, barely visible, a pinprick of light, pulsing steadily from what should have been nothing more than decorative molding around a wall sconce. Cal stopped walking. In 3 years of working this building, he had memorized every light, every shadow, every normal variation in the electrical systems that kept Skycrest Towers humming through the night. This red light didn't belong. It was positioned at eye level, angled toward the hallway that led to Evelyn Locke's private entrance, and it was definitely not part of the building's standard security installation. His military training kicked in automatically observe, assess, decide. The light was small enough to be missed by casual observation, but positioned perfectly to capture anyone approaching or leaving the penthouse. It had been installed recently. Cal was certain he would have noticed it during previous rounds. Someone had placed it there deliberately, and they had done so with enough skill to make it nearly invisible. Cal's throat went dry as the implication settled in. Someone was watching Evelyn Locke, recording her movements, violating her privacy. In the one place where she should feel completely secure, the question was whether this was an isolated incident or part of something larger. He spent the next hour systematically checking every floor that provided access to the penthouse levels. What he found made his stomach turn. There were 6 additional cameras, all positioned with the same careful precision, all aimed at areas where Evelyn might be expected to pass. The elevator bank that served her private floors, the emergency stairwell that connected to her level, the service corridor where deliveries were made to the penthouse kitchen. None of these cameras appeared on the building's official security system. Cal checked and double-checked the monitors in his office, reviewing the standard feeds that he monitored every night. The unauthorized cameras were completely separate, operating on their own power source and transmitting to some unknown location. By 4 a.m., Cal had documented the location of each hidden camera, noting their positions and angles with the methodical precision his army sergeants had drilled into him. He had also made a decision that could cost him his job, his income, and his ability to provide for Sam. But some things mattered more than job security, and a woman's right to privacy in her own home was one of them. The morning shift change came at 6 a.m., and Cal waited until the day guards had settled into their routine before making his way to the main lobby. Evelyn Locke was an early riser. He knew from 3 years of observation that she often appeared in the lobby around 7:30, either heading out for morning appointments or returning from her daily run through the adjacent park. She emerged from the private elevator at 7:35, dressed in running clothes that probably cost more than Cal's monthly rent, but somehow managed to look understated rather than ostentatious. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and there was a flush in her cheeks that suggested she had already completed her morning exercise routine. Cal's hands trembled slightly as he approached her. This was the moment that would change everything for both of them. He could feel the weight of his security badge against his chest, the plastic card that represented his access to this world and his ability to keep Sam fed and housed. In about 30 seconds, he might be handing that badge over to building management and walking out the front door for the last time. "Miss Locke," he called softly, and she turned toward him with the polite attention she had always shown the building staff. "Good morning, Cal. How are you?" Her voice carried the cultured tones of expensive education, but there was genuine warmth in her greeting. She had always remembered his name, always treated him with more respect than many residents showed their help. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you about something important, something concerning your safety." Cal kept his voice low, aware that the lobby's marble surfaces carried sound in unexpected ways. Evelyn's expression shifted immediately, the polite smile replaced by sharp attention. "What kind of safety concern?" Cal took a breath that felt like stepping off a cliff. "Ma'am, you're being recorded." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge to everything Evelyn thought she knew about her carefully controlled world. Her face went pale and flushed red with what might have been anger or embarrassment or fear. "What do you mean, recorded?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but Cal could hear the steel beneath the silk. "Hidden cameras. At least 7 of them that I've found so far, all positioned to capture your movements to and from the penthouse. They're not part of the building's official security system. Someone installed them without authorization, and they're transmitting to an unknown location." Evelyn's composure cracked for just a moment, revealing the vulnerability beneath her polished exterior. "Are you certain?" "Yes, ma'am. I documented their locations during my rounds last night. I can show you exactly where they are." Cal pulled out his security badge, holding it carefully in his palm. "I know this conversation could cost me my job, but I couldn't let this continue without warning you." For a long moment, Evelyn stared at the badge in his hand, understanding the weight of what he was offering to sacrifice. When she looked up at his face, her eyes held a mixture of gratitude and something that might have been respect. "Show me," she said simply. They took the service elevator to the 47th floor, moving through corridors that Evelyn had probably never seen despite living above him for 5 years. Cal led her to the first camera location, pointing out the tiny red light nestled in what appeared to be decorative molding. "There," he said quietly. "If you look carefully, you can see the lens. It's positioned to capture anyone approaching. Your private elevator. Evelyn studied the device with the same intensity she probably brought to board meetings and business negotiations. How long has it been there? I'm not certain, but it wasn't there last week. I would have noticed. Cal moved down the hallway to the next location. There are more. Whoever did this was thorough. As they moved from camera to camera, Cal watched Evelyn's initial shock transform into cold fury. This was a woman who was accustomed to control, to privacy, to the security that wealth was supposed to provide. The violation of that security had awakened something fierce and protective in her nature. Who has access to these areas? She asked after they had examined the fourth hidden camera. Building maintenance, obviously. The cleaning crews, though they work during the day. Emergency services. And anyone with a master security card. Cal hesitated, then added, Your fiancé has been in the building quite frequently lately. I've seen workmen with him on several occasions. Evelyn stopped walking. Victor? What kind of workmen? They said they were updating security systems, improving internet infrastructure. Professional-looking men with the right credentials. I had no reason to question their presence. Cal felt sick as he spoke the words. I should have been more careful. This isn't your fault. Evelyn's voice was sharp with controlled anger. Someone deliberately deceived you, used your trust against you. The question is why. They completed the survey in silence, documenting each camera location with the precision of investigators building a case. By the time they returned to the lobby, the morning rush was beginning, residents heading out for work. Delivery services bringing packages and flowers. The normal bustle of a building where important people lived important lives, but nothing felt normal anymore. The cameras had changed everything, transformed Evelyn's sanctuary into a fishbowl, where her most private moments were being captured by unknown watchers for unknown purposes. I need to think about this, Evelyn said as they stood near the main security desk. I need to understand who would do this and why. Ma'am, there's something else you should consider, Cal said carefully. Whoever installed these cameras had to have detailed knowledge of the building's layout, access to the right floors, and enough time to do the work without being detected. This wasn't random. It was planned by someone who knows you, knows your routine, knows when you'd be most vulnerable. Evelyn's face went pale again, but her voice remained steady. You think it's someone I trust. I think it's someone who has been close enough to study your movements, someone who would benefit from having access to your private conversations and activities. Cal looked directly into her eyes. Someone who might use that information against you. The weight of that possibility settled between them like a physical presence. Evelyn's engagement party was scheduled for the following weekend, a celebration that would announce her future to society and seal her commitment to Victor Hall. But now that future felt uncertain, shadowed by questions that demanded answers. Will you help me find out who's responsible? Evelyn asked quietly. Cal thought of Sam, asleep in their small apartment, trusting his father to make decisions that would keep their world safe and stable. He thought of the job that paid their bills and provided their health insurance, the security that could disappear with one phone call to building management. Then he looked at Evelyn's face, saw the fear she was trying so hard to hide, and made the only choice his conscience would allow. Double quotes, yes, Mom. I'll help you. The building blueprints were stored in the management office on the 3rd floor, housed in metal filing cabinets that hadn't been updated since the tower's construction 15 years ago. Cal had legitimate access to these documents as part of his security responsibilities, but accessing them with Evelyn Locke at his side felt like crossing a line from which there would be no return. The original architectural plans will show us every access point, every service corridor, every place where someone could run cables without being detected, Cal explained as he spread the massive drawings across the conference table. The papers were yellowed with age, covered in technical markings that told the story of how 63 floors of steel and glass had been conceived and built. Evelyn studied the blueprints with the same intensity she had brought to examining the hidden cameras. I never realized how complex this building really is. Look at all these passages behind the walls, these utility spaces I never knew existed. Most residents don't, Cal said, tracing his finger along a service corridor that ran the length of the 47th floor. But whoever installed those cameras knew exactly where to look. They understood the building's hidden infrastructure well enough to use it against you. The blueprints revealed a maze of maintenance tunnels, electrical conduits, and HVAC ducts that formed a secret network throughout the building. Someone with access to these plans could move unseen through the tower's hidden arteries, installing surveillance equipment in locations that would never be discovered during routine maintenance checks. Here, Evelyn pointed to a utility shaft that connected multiple floors. This runs directly behind my private hallway. Someone could access it from the mechanical room in the basement and run cables all the way to the penthouse level. Cal nodded grimly. And here's how they could access your floor without using the main elevator or stairwells. He indicated a service elevator that connected to the utility areas. Building maintenance uses this regularly, but it requires a special access card. How many people have those cards? Officially? About 12. Building management, head of maintenance, senior security staff, and emergency services. Cal hesitated. But cards can be copied, or temporary access can be granted for contractors and workmen. They spent the next 2 hours mapping potential access routes, identifying every way someone could reach the areas where cameras had been installed. The process was methodical, almost meditative, and Cal found himself impressed by Evelyn's analytical mind. She approached the problem like a businesswoman solving a complex logistics challenge, asking precise questions and making connections that might have escaped someone less accustomed to thinking strategically. Victor brought workmen here 3 times in the past month, Evelyn said suddenly, looking up from the blueprints. They were supposedly upgrading the penthouse's internet infrastructure for better video conferencing capabilities. I barely paid attention because I was preparing for the quarterly board meeting. Cal felt a chill run down his spine. Do you remember what company they claimed to work for? Tech Secure Solutions, I think. Victor said they were the best in the Nye City for high-end installations. Evelyn's voice carried the flat tone of someone realizing they had been systematically deceived. He was very insistent that I not interfere with their work, said I should stay out of the penthouse while they were installing equipment. Where did you go during those times? Victor arranged for me to stay at his place downtown. He said it would be romantic, like a preview of married life. The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable now. I thought he was being thoughtful. Cal was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. Victor had orchestrated Evelyn's absence from her own home, while unknown men installed surveillance equipment throughout her private spaces. The level of planning required for such an operation suggested motivations that went far beyond simple jealousy or curiosity. Ms. Locke, I need to ask you something, and I hope you won't take offense. Cal chose his words carefully. Is there anything about your business, your personal life, or your family that someone might want to use against you? Any information that could be valuable to competitors or hostile parties? Evelyn was quiet for a long time, staring at the blueprints without really seeing them. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful and measured. Locke Industries is worth approximately $800 million. We're privately held, which means I control the majority of shares. There have been several attempts to purchase the company over the years, all of which I've declined. She looked up at Cal. If someone wanted to force a sale or gain control of company decisions, they would need either my cooperation or leverage that could compel my cooperation. What kind of leverage? Compromising information, evidence of poor judgment, illegal activity, or personal behavior that could damage the company's reputation and my ability to lead it. Evelyn's business training was evident in her clinical analysis of her own vulnerability. Recorded conversations about business strategy, personal relationships, family matters, all of that could be weaponized by someone who understood how to use it. Cal thought about the cameras they had discovered, positioned to capture Evelyn's most private moments in her own home. Someone could record you making business calls from your penthouse, discussing confidential company matters, revealing information about deals or strategies that competitors would pay dearly to obtain. Or they could record personal conversations that, taken out of context, might make me appear unstable or unfit to run a major corporation. Evelyn's voice grew harder. My father built this company over 40 years. I've spent my entire adult life learning to lead it responsibly. I won't let someone destroy that legacy for their own profit. They were interrupted by Cal's phone buzzing with a text message. He glanced at the screen and smiled despite the seriousness of their situation. It's from Sam. He wants to know if I'll be home in time to help him practice his presentation about Jupiter. How old is your son? Evelyn asked, and Cal was surprised by the genuine interest in her voice. 10. He's in 4th grade. Loves science and art in equal measure. Wants to be an astronaut when he grows up, or maybe an artist who paints pictures of space. Cal's expression softened as he talked about Sam. He's the reason I work nights. It lets me be there when he gets home from school, help with homework, make sure he knows he's not alone in the world. It must be difficult, raising him by yourself. It's the most important thing I've ever done. Cal looked directly at Evelyn. Which is why I need you to understand that helping you with this investigation puts my job at risk. If building management decides I've overstepped my authority, I could be terminated immediately. No references, no severance, no health insurance for Sam. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, studying Cal's face with an expression he couldn't quite read. What if I could guarantee that wouldn't happen? What if helping me meant improving your situation rather than jeopardizing it? I don't understand. My company needs people with your skills, attention to detail, analytical thinking, the ability to see patterns that others miss. We have a corporate security division that handles sensitive investigations and protective services for our executives. Evelyn's tone was businesslike but sincere. I could arrange for you to be transferred to that division with a significant increase in salary and much better benefits for you and Sam. Cal stared at her, momentarily speechless. The offer was more generous than anything he had dared hope for, but it also complicated everything about their emerging relationship. Why would you do that? He asked carefully. Because you risked your livelihood to warn me about those cameras. Because you're willing to help me find the truth, even though it could cost you everything. Because Sam deserves a father who doesn't have to choose between doing the right thing and providing for his family. Evelyn folded the blueprints with precise movements. And because I'm going to need someone I can trust absolutely if we're going to expose whoever is behind this surveillance operation. Cal thought about Sam, practicing his presentation about the largest planet in the solar system, dreaming of adventures among the stars. He thought about the cramped apartment where his son created art from construction paper and crayons, where water stains on the ceiling marked the boundaries of their modest world. If I accept your offer, people will say I'm taking advantage of the situation, using your vulnerability to improve my circumstances. Let them say what they want. Evelyn's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions. Others would spend weeks debating. I judge people by their actions, not by what others think of those actions. You've shown me more loyalty in 24 hours than some people I've known for years. The weight of that statement hung between them, heavy with implications neither was quite ready to examine too closely. But as Cal looked at the blueprints spread across the table documents, it revealed the hidden architecture of a world he had only observed from the outside. He began to understand that the investigation they were undertaking would change more than just their professional relationship. It would change everything. The The wedding invitation proofs arrived by courier that afternoon, delivered to Evelyn's penthouse office while she and Cal were reviewing security protocols in the building's basement mechanical rooms. The timing felt like a cruel joke elegant. Cream cardstock announcing her engagement gala, while they traced unauthorized cables through utility tunnels, like investigators pursuing evidence of a crime. When Evelyn opened the package, Cal could see her hands trembling slightly as she examined the invitation's gold-embossed lettering. Mr. and Mrs. Victor Hall request the pleasure of your company at an engagement celebration. The formal language seemed to mock their growing suspicions about Victor's true intentions. The date is set for next Saturday, Evelyn said quietly, setting the invitations aside. 300 guests, champagne reception, dinner, dancing. Victor has been planning this for months, coordinating with the caterers and florists, insisting on every detail being perfect. Cal studied her face, noting the conflict between the woman who had built a business empire and the person who was discovering that her most intimate relationship might be built on deception. How long have you been engaged? 6 months. We've been dating for just over a year. Evelyn's voice carried the tone of someone reviewing facts that no longer made sense. Victor was very persistent in his courtship. Flowers every week, surprise weekend trips, constant attention and affection. I thought I was lucky to find someone who understood the demands of my position and still wanted to be part of my life. They were sitting in the security office now, surrounded by Sam's cheerful drawings and the quiet hum of monitoring equipment. The contrast between the child's optimistic artwork and their investigation into surveillance and betrayal created an atmosphere of surreal displacement. Tell me about the courtship, Cal said gently. Was there anything that seemed unusual or rushed? Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, clearly revisiting memories through the lens of their recent discoveries. Victor always seemed to know exactly what I needed to hear, exactly when I needed to hear it. After difficult board meetings, he would pair with my favorite wine and dinner from the restaurant where we had our first date. When I was stressed about quarterly reports, he would arrange for us to spend weekends at his family's estate in the Hamptons. That sounds thoughtful. It was, or it seemed to be. Evelyn's expression grew troubled. But now I'm wondering how. He always knew when I was having difficult days at work, when I was feeling overwhelmed or vulnerable. I never told him about specific board meetings or quarterly pressures. He just seemed to anticipate my moods with uncanny accuracy. Cal felt his investigator's instincts sharpening. If someone had been monitoring your private conversations, recording your phone calls from the penthouse, they would know exactly when you were struggling with business pressures. They would know when I was most likely to appreciate romantic gestures, when I would be most grateful for someone offering comfort and support. Evelyn's voice grew harder as the implications became clear. Victor could have been using information gathered through surveillance to manipulate my emotions, to make himself seem like the perfect partner. The phone on Cal's desk buzzed with an internal call from the front lobby. He answered with his usual professional greeting, then listened carefully before responding. "I'll be right down," he said, ending the call and looking at Evelyn with concern. "Victor is in the lobby. He's asking to speak with you, and he seems agitated about something." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, gathering herself for a confrontation. She wasn't ready to have. "I can't face him right now. Not when I don't know what he knows about our investigation." "You don't have to. I can tell him you're not available, that you're in meetings all day." "No." Evelyn's voice carried sudden determination. "I need to see how he behaves, whether he shows any signs of knowing that we've discovered the cameras. But I want you there, Cal. I want a witness to whatever he says." They took the elevator to the main lobby, where Victor Halle was pacing near the reception desk with the controlled agitation of a man accustomed to having his requests honored immediately. He was dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than Cal's monthly salary, his dark hair perfectly styled, his smile ready to deploy at a moment's notice. "Evelyn, darling," Victor said as she approached, moving to embrace her with the easy familiarity of an engaged couple. "I've been trying to reach you all morning. Your assistant said you were in meetings, but I was hoping we could discuss the final arrangements for Saturday's party." Cal watched the interaction carefully, noting how Victor's eyes flickered briefly in his direction before dismissing him as irrelevant. There was something in Victor's manner that suggested controlled tension, as if he were performing a role that required more effort than usual. "I've been dealing with some security concerns," Evelyn said carefully. "Building management wanted to review our procedures." "Security concerns?" Victor's voice sharpened with what might have been genuine alarm or carefully performed interest. "What kind of concerns? Has something happened?" "Just routine updates to our monitoring systems," Cal interjected smoothly. "Ms. Locke has been very cooperative in helping us identify any potential vulnerabilities." Victor looked at Cal more carefully, this time as if seeing him for the first time. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced. Victor Hall." He extended his hand with the practiced charm of someone accustomed to making important first impressions. "Cal Grant, head of night security." Cal accepted the handshake, noting that Victor's grip was firm but brief, dismissive in the way of someone who categorized people quickly and moved on. "Cal has been very thorough in his security assessment," Evelyn said, watching Victor's face for any reaction. "He's identified several areas where our current systems could be improved." "Excellent. I'm glad to hear we're taking Evelyn's safety seriously." Victor's smile was perfect, but Cal caught something in his eyes, flicker of calculation that suggested he was processing information rather than simply making conversation. "Perhaps we should discuss upgrading the penthouse systems as well. I know some excellent contractors who specialize in high-end security installations." The suggestion hung in the air like a test, and Cal felt Evelyn tense beside him. Victor was either incredibly tone-deaf, or he was probing to see how much they knew about the unauthorized cameras. "We're handling all security upgrades through building management now," Evelyn said smoothly. "I want to ensure everything is properly coordinated and documented." "Of course, darling. Whatever makes you feel most secure." Victor's tone remained warm, but Cal detected a subtle shift in his posture, a tightening around his eyes that suggested frustration with Evelyn's response. They talked for a few more minutes about the engagement party, about guest lists and catering, arrangements and the orchestra Victor had hired for dancing. Throughout the conversation, Cal observed the dynamic between the couple, noting how Victor seemed to expect immediate agreement to his suggestions and how Evelyn had begun deflecting rather than engaging with his plans. When Victor finally left, promising to call later about final arrangements, Evelyn and Cal stood in the lobby watching his town car disappear into afternoon traffic. "What did you think?" Evelyn asked quietly. "I think he was fishing for information about our security review. His suggestion about upgrading penthouse systems felt like a test to see how much we know." Cal paused, considering his next words carefully. "And I think he's used to having more control over your responses than he had today." "I felt like I was talking to a stranger," Evelyn admitted. "Someone wearing Victor's face, but operating from a completely different agenda. For the first time since we've been together, I felt like I was being managed rather than loved." They returned to the security office, where Sam's drawings seemed to offer a refuge of innocence in a world that was becoming increasingly complex and dangerous. As they settled back into their investigation, Cal found himself thinking about the engagement party invitations, about 300 guests gathering to celebrate a union that might be built on surveillance and deception. "We have 5 days until the party," Evelyn said, voicing the thought that was occupying both their minds. 5 days to understand what Victor really wants and whether I can trust anything about our relationship. Cal looked at the wedding invitations, scattered across his desk, their elegant script promising a celebration of love and commitment. But all he could see now were questions that demanded answers, and the growing certainty that Saturday's party would be remembered for reasons no one currently anticipated. The corporate files spread across Evelyn's penthouse office told a story that chilled Cal to the bone. Locke Industries' quarterly reports, board meeting minutes, and strategic planning documents revealed not just the company's impressive financial health, but also its vulnerabilities, information that, in the wrong hands, could be used to orchestrate a hostile takeover or manipulate stock prices. "Look at this," Evelyn said, pointing to a confidential memo about the company's planned expansion into European markets. "This document outlines our entire strategy for the next 3 years, including partner negotiations that haven't been made public. If a competitor knew our timeline and target companies, they could undercut our bids or steal our potential partners." Cal studied the documents with growing alarm. His military background had taught him to think strategically about information warfare, and what he was seeing here was a treasure trove of intelligence that could destroy Locke Industries from within. "How many people have access to these files?" he asked. "The board of directors, senior executives, and my personal assistant." "That's fewer than 15 people total." Evelyn's voice carried the weight of someone realizing how completely her privacy had been violated. "But if someone has been recording my phone conversations from the penthouse, they would have heard me discussing all of this with my executives and board members." They had spent the morning reviewing Victor's background, using resources available through Evelyn's corporate security department. What they discovered painted a picture that was both impressive and troubling. Victor Hale was indeed a successful venture capitalist with legitimate business interests, but his recent investments showed a pattern that raised questions about his motivations for pursuing Evelyn. 6 months ago, Victor invested heavily in a technology company that specializes in corporate intelligence and competitive analysis, Cal noted, reading from a financial report. "The same month he proposed to you." "Meridian Analytics," Evelyn said, recognizing the company name. "They've been trying to get consulting contracts with Fortune 500 companies, offering services that walk right up to the line of corporate espionage. I turned down their proposal last year because their methods seemed questionable." "What if Victor's engagement to you was never about love?" Cal asked carefully. "What if it was about gaining access to Locke Industries' confidential information through surveillance of your private communications?" The question hung between them like an accusation. Neither wanted a voice, but both were beginning to believe. Evelyn sat quietly for a long moment, processing the implications of a year-long relationship that might have been nothing more than an elaborate business scheme. "I need to call my attorney," she said finally. "I need to understand what legal protections I have if someone has been recording my private conversations without consent." While Evelyn made her calls, Cal continued reviewing the files, paying particular attention to any documents that mentioned upcoming business decisions or strategic planning. What he found made him increasingly concerned about the timing of Victor's engagement party. "Evelyn," he said when she finished her phone conversation, "look at this board meeting agenda for next Monday. You're scheduled to vote on the European expansion proposal, and the decision requires unanimous board approval." "That's right. It's the largest expansion in the company's history, worth approximately $200 million over 5 years. Evelyn studied the agenda with fresh eyes. "Victor has been very supportive of the expansion, encouraging me to move forward aggressively. What happens if the board vote is delayed, or if you change your mind about the expansion? The entire deal could collapse. We'd lose our window of opportunity, and our competitors would move into those markets ahead of us." Evelyn's expression grew troubled. "It would cost us millions in lost revenue and strategic positioning." Cal felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. What if the engagement party isn't just a celebration? What if it's a deadline? Victor may be planning to use whatever information he's gathered through surveillance to pressure you into making business decisions that benefit his investors. or to create a public scandal that would force me to step down as CEO, opening the door for a hostile takeover. Evelyn's business training allowed her to see the strategic implications with frightening clarity. If compromising recordings of my private conversations were released to the media, especially conversations that could be taken out of context, the board might vote to remove me from leadership to protect the company's reputation. They were interrupted by Cal's phone ringing. He glanced at the caller ID and smiled despite the gravity of their situation. It's Sam's school. He probably forgot his lunch money again. But the voice on the other end wasn't Sam's teacher. It was the school principal, and her tone was concerned rather than routine. Mr. Grant? I'm calling because Sam seems unusually worried about something today. He's been asking our guidance counselor whether people can lose their jobs for helping other people, and whether families sometimes have to move away suddenly. Is everything all right at home? Cal felt his heart sink. Despite his efforts to shield Sam from his concerns about the investigation, his 10-year-old son had picked up on the tension and was worrying about their future. Everything's fine, Cal said carefully. I'll talk to him when he gets home this afternoon. When he ended the call, Evelyn was watching him with an expression of concern and something that might have been guilt. Sam knows something is wrong, Cal explained. He's worried that I might lose my job, that our life might change suddenly. Kids are more perceptive than we give them credit for. I'm sorry, Evelyn said quietly. I never wanted this investigation to affect your son. Maybe we should... No. Cal's voice was firm. Sam is worried because he loves me and he can sense when I'm under stress. But he's also strong and resilient, and he deserves to live in a world where people stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Evelyn nodded, but Cal could see that his son's anxiety had added another layer of complexity to their situation. They weren't just investigating a potential crime. They were gambling with the stability of a 10-year-old boy's world. I want to meet him, Evelyn said suddenly. I want to meet Sam if we're going to continue this investigation, if my decisions are going to affect his life. I think I should understand what's at stake. Cal was quiet for a moment, considering the request. Introducing Sam to Evelyn would cross another line, bringing his son into a situation that was already fraught with uncertainty. But it would also give Evelyn a clearer picture of what Cal was risking by helping her. He gets home from school at 3:30, Cal said. He usually does his homework at the kitchen table while I make dinner. If you want to meet him, you're welcome to come by our apartment. I'd like that, Evelyn said. I'd like to understand the life you've built for him, the world you're trying to protect. As they gathered up the corporate files and prepared to leave the penthouse, Cal found himself thinking about the contrast between Evelyn's elegant office and his modest apartment, between her world of board meetings and strategic planning, and Sam's world of homework and crayon drawings in a few hours. Those worlds would intersect for the first time, and Cal wasn't sure any of them were prepared for what that might reveal about the choices the secret marriage contract lay spread across Cal's kitchen table like a roadmap to betrayal. Its legal language so dense and convoluted that it took Evelyn's attorney 40 minutes to explain its full implications over speakerphone. What they discovered turned their investigation from a case of surveillance into something far more sinister, a carefully orchestrated plan to seize control of Locke Industries through legal manipulation and corporate espionage. The contract is structured as a prenuptial agreement, explained Margaret Chun, Evelyn's longtime attorney, her voice tight with professional outrage. But buried in the financial clauses are provisions that would give Victor significant influence over company decisions. If you were to become incapacitated, face criminal charges, or be deemed unfit to serve as CEO by the board of directors. Evelyn's face had gone pale as the attorney explained each clause. I never signed this document. I've never seen it before in my life. The signature page contains what appears to be your signature, along with notarization and witness signatures, Margaret continued. If this document were to be presented as evidence in a legal proceeding, it would be very difficult to prove that you didn't sign it voluntarily. Cal studied the contract with growing alarm, his military background helping him recognize the strategic thinking behind its construction. This isn't just about money or control of the company. It's about creating legal cover for a hostile takeover. They had found the contract hidden in the encrypted files, buried among hundreds of surveillance recordings, like a smoking gun waiting to be discovered. Its existence explained everything, why Victor had been so methodical in his surveillance of Evelyn's private communications, why he had been so insistent on moving forward with their engagement party, why his courtship had felt rushed and strategically timed. "Look at this clause," Evelyn said, pointing to a section of legal text that seemed particularly ominous. "If I were to face any kind of public scandal or criminal investigation, Victor would assume temporary control of my voting shares until the matter was resolved. And this section gives him permanent control if you were to be convicted of any crime, regardless of how minor," Margaret added over the phone. "Money laundering, tax evasion, insider trading, any white-collar crime that could be constructed from misinterpreted business communications." Cal felt the pieces of Victor's plan clicking into place with terrifying clarity. The surveillance recordings aren't just for gathering business intelligence. They're for manufacturing evidence of criminal behavior. Take enough hours of private business conversations out of context, edit them carefully, and you could make anyone look guilty of financial crimes. "Exactly," Margaret confirmed. "And if this marriage contract were legally valid, Victor would control the company while Evelyn fought criminal charges that could take years to resolve. By the time she cleared her name, Locke Industries could be sold, dismantled, or merged with Victor's other business interests." The revelation hung over them like a storm cloud, transforming their understanding of everything that had happened over the past year. Victor's courtship hadn't been romantic. It had been predatory. His attention and affection hadn't been genuine. They had been tools in a long-term strategy to steal an $800 million company through manipulation and fraud. "How did he get my signature on this document?" Evelyn asked, though her voice suggested she was beginning to understand. The answer: "Remember the papers Victor brought you to sign 3 months ago?" Cal said quietly. "He said they were insurance documents related to the engagement party, protection against vendor cancellations and venue problems." Evelyn closed her eyes, clearly remembering the incident. "He brought them to my penthouse office," said his attorney. "Had prepared them as a precaution because wedding planning involves so many financial commitments. I signed them without reading them carefully because I trusted him." "Those were probably cover sheets attached to the marriage contract," Margaret explained. "You thought you were signing party insurance documents, but you were actually signing a legal agreement that gives Victor control of your company under specific circumstances." The sophistication of the deception was breathtaking in its cynicism. Victor had spent over a year building a relationship based entirely on lies, using Evelyn's trust and affection as weapons against her. He had turned her home into a surveillance center, her privacy into leverage, and her love into a legal trap. "There's more," Cal said grimly, turning to another section of the encrypted files. "I found email communications between Victor and someone at Meridian Analytics. They've been planning this operation for 18 months, since before Victor even met you." The emails painted a picture of corporate espionage elevated to the level of personal assault. Meridian Analytics had researched Evelyn's background, her business practices, her personal vulnerabilities, and her social connections. They had identified her as a target not because of anything she had done wrong, but because she was successful, isolated, and trusting enough to be manipulated. "Listen to this," Cal continued, reading from one of the emails. "Subject has no close family members who might interfere with relationship development. Father's death 2 years ago left her emotionally vulnerable and seeking connection. Business pressures have limited her social circle to professional associates who are unlikely to question romantic relationship. Evelyn made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. They studied me like a business opportunity. My loneliness, my grief over my father's death, my dedication to the company, they turned all of it into data points for their strategy. The engagement party is the deadline, Cal realized, understanding the final piece of Victor's plan. Once you're publicly committed to marriage, once 300 guests have witnessed your engagement, it becomes much more difficult to back out without creating exactly the kind of public scandal that would trigger the contract's control provisions. And if I tried to break the engagement after the party, Victor could claim that I was emotionally unstable, unreliable, possibly suffering from mental health issues that made me unfit to run a major corporation. Evelyn added, her business mind grasping the legal implications with frightening clarity. Margaret's voice over the speakerphone carried the authority of someone who had spent decades protecting clients from exactly this kind of sophisticated fraud. We need to move quickly. If Victor realizes that you've discovered his plan, he'll accelerate his timeline or find other ways to trigger the contract's provisions. What are our options? Cal asked. We need to prove that Evelyn's signature was obtained through fraud, that the surveillance was conducted without consent, and that Victor's entire relationship with Evelyn was based on deception for financial gain, Margaret explained. We have the recordings, we have the contract, and we have the communications between Victor and Meridian Analytics. That's enough to build a case, but we need to present it before Victor can activate his contingency. Plans. Sam appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing his eyes and looking confused by the late-night activity. Dad, is everything okay? I heard voices. Cal's heart clenched as he looked at his son, realizing that their investigation had pulled a 10-year-old boy into a situation that could affect the rest of his life. Whatever decisions they made in the next few days would determine not just Evelyn's future, but Sam's as well. Everything's fine, buddy, Cal said gently. Ms. Locke and I are just working on some important business. Go back to bed, and I'll see you in the morning. As Sam disappeared back down the hallway, Cal and Evelyn looked at each other across the kitchen table, both understanding that they had reached a point of no return. The evidence spread before them demanded action, but taking that action would expose them to risks they couldn't fully calculate. Tomorrow is Thursday, Evelyn said quietly. The engagement party is Saturday night. We have less than 48 hours to decide how to handle this. We're going to stop him, Cal said with quiet determination. We're going to expose what he's done, protect your company, and make sure he faces consequences for what he's put you through. Evelyn nodded, but Cal could see the fear beneath her resolve. They weren't just fighting for control of a business empire. They were fighting for the right to trust, to love, to believe that genuine human connection was possible in a world where everything could be surveilled, recorded, and WEAPONIZED as they gathered the evidence and prepared to leave the apartment. Cal found himself thinking about the marriage contract and its cynical assumptions about human nature. Victor had built his entire plan on the belief that love could be manufactured, trust could be exploited, and intimacy could be turned into leverage. But as Cal looked at Evelyn, he realized that Victor's greatest miscalculation might have been assuming that genuine connection was impossible. In trying to destroy Evelyn's faith in authentic relationships, Victor had inadvertently created the conditions for something real to develop between two people who had learned to recognize the difference between manipulation and truth. The encrypted hard drive sat on Cal's kitchen table like an accusation, its black metal surface reflecting the overhead light while Sam worked on his math homework 3 feet away. Evelyn had arrived at their apartment promptly at 3:30, carrying a briefcase that contained the digital evidence they had spent 2 days extracting from the building's hidden surveillance network. Sam had accepted Evelyn's presence with the easy adaptability of a child, accustomed to his father's unpredictable work schedule. He had politely answered her questions about school, shown her his latest drawing of a space station orbiting Jupiter, and then settled into his homework routine as if wealthy heiresses visited their apartment every day. "The files are password protected," Evelyn explained quietly, keeping her voice low enough not to disturb Sam's concentration. "But my IT consultant was able to crack the encryption. What we found is extensive." Cal's stomach tightened as Evelyn opened her laptop and connected the hard drive. The screen filled with folder after folder of video files, each labeled with dates and timestamps going back 3 months. 3 months of Evelyn's private life, recorded without her knowledge or consent. "How much footage are we talking about?" Cal asked. "Over 60 hours of recordings. Phone conversations, video conferences with my board of directors, private meetings with attorneys and financial advisors." Evelyn's voice was controlled, but Cal could hear the anger beneath her professional composure. "They recorded everything. Every private moment in my own home." As they scrolled through the files, the scope of the violation became clear. Someone had been systematically documenting Evelyn's business communications, her personal phone calls, even her conversations with household staff. The level of detail was staggering and invasive beyond anything Cal had imagined. "Dad?" Sam's voice interrupted their review. "Is Ms. Locke staying for dinner? Because I was thinking we could make spaghetti, and there's probably enough for 3 people. Cal looked at his son, then at Evelyn, realizing that this simple domestic moment had created an unexpected intimacy. Here was Sam, offering to share their modest dinner with someone he had just met, displaying the generous spirit that had sustained them through 4 years of widowed life. "I don't want to impose," Evelyn said, but there was something in her voice that suggested she wanted very much to stay. "You're not imposing," Cal said. "We'd be happy to have you join us." As Cal began preparing dinner, Evelyn found herself drawn into conversation with Sam about his school projects and his dreams of becoming an astronaut. Watching them interact, Cal was struck by how naturally Evelyn adapted to Sam's world, asking genuine questions about his interests and listening to his answers with the same attention she brought to board meetings. "Ms. Locke," Sam said as he helped set the table, "do you know anything about Jupiter's moons? I'm supposed to give a presentation tomorrow, and I want to make sure I get the details right." "Actually, I do know a bit about astronomy," Evelyn said, settling into her chair with an ease that surprised Cal. "Jupiter has 79 known moons, but the 4 largest ones were discovered by Galileo over 400 years ago. They're called the Galilean moons." Sam's eyes lit up with excitement. "What are their names?" "Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto," Evelyn recited. "Europa is particularly interesting because scientists think it might have an ocean beneath its icy surface, which means it could potentially harbor life." Cal found himself smiling as he listened to their conversation, charmed by the sight of Evelyn Locke, billionaire heiress, helping his 10-year-old son practice his astronomy presentation. The contrast between this domestic scene and the surveillance footage they had been reviewing felt surreal. After dinner, Sam excused himself to finish his homework, leaving Cal and Evelyn alone with the encrypted hard drive and its damning contents. They returned to their review of the files, but the atmosphere had changed. The simple act of sharing a meal had created a foundation of trust and intimacy that made their investigation feel less like a professional obligation and more like a partnership between people who genuinely cared about each other's welfare. "This one is from last week," Evelyn said, clicking on a video file dated 3 days before Cal had discovered the cameras. "It's a recording of a phone conversation I had with my attorney about the European expansion deal." The video showed Evelyn in her penthouse office speaking on her cell phone while reviewing documents. The audio quality was excellent, capturing every word of a conversation that should have been completely private. "If Victor or his associates have access to these recordings, they know everything about our expansion plans," Cal observed. "They know our timeline, our budget, our target companies, and our negotiation strategies. They also know about the board meeting on Monday, Evelyn added grimly. This conversation includes my attorney's advice about the legal implications of the expansion deal. Anyone with access to this information could sabotage our negotiations or use it to manipulate the board's decision. As they continued reviewing files, a pattern emerged that made Cal's investigative instincts sharpen with alarm. The recordings weren't random or opportunistic. They were focused and strategic, concentrating on conversations that involved Locke Industries' most sensitive business information. "Look at this," Cal said, pointing to a series of files from 2 weeks ago. "These recordings are all from the same day, all focused on your conversations about quarterly earnings and profit projections. Someone knew exactly when you would be discussing financial information that could affect stock prices. Or someone was directing me to have those conversations at specific times," Evelyn said slowly, the implications dawning on her. "Victor suggested I take several of these calls from home rather than the office. He said it would be more comfortable, more private. He was positioning you to be recorded in the one place where you felt completely secure," Cal realized. "Your penthouse was supposed to be your sanctuary, the place where you could speak freely without worrying about corporate espionage or competitive intelligence." The weight of that betrayal settled over them like a physical presence. Victor hadn't just violated Evelyn's privacy. He had systematically destroyed her sense of security in her own home, turning her sanctuary into a surveillance center for his own benefit. "There's something else," Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some of these recordings include conversations I had with my therapist. Phone sessions where I discussed personal matters, family history, emotional struggles related to running the company." Cal felt a surge of protective anger unlike anything he had experienced since his wife's death. The violation represented by those recordings went beyond business espionage into something cruel and personal, an assault on Evelyn's most vulnerable moments. "We need to contact law enforcement," he said firmly. "This isn't just corporate espionage. It's stalking, invasion of privacy, potentially blackmail. These recordings could be used to destroy you personally, as well as professionally." "Not yet," Evelyn said, though her voice shook slightly. "If we involve the police now, Victor will destroy any evidence we haven't found yet. We need to understand the full scope of his operation before we make our move." From the living room came the sound of Sam practicing his presentation, his young voice confidently describing the features of Jupiter's largest moons. The contrast between his innocent enthusiasm and the evidence of systematic surveillance created a cognitive dissonance that left Cal feeling off balance and protective. "Evelyn," he said quietly, using her first name for the first time since. "Their investigation began. I want you to know that whatever happens with this investigation, whatever risks we're taking, I'm glad we're doing this together. You deserve better than someone who would violate your trust so completely." She looked at him across the kitchen table, her eyes bright with unshed tears, but her expression determined. "Thank you, Cal, for everything. For warning me, for helping me, for letting me into your world tonight. Sitting here with you and Sam, sharing dinner and talking about astronomy, I've felt more at peace than I have in months." The moment stretched between them, heavy with implications neither was quite ready to acknowledge. But as they sat surrounded by evidence of betrayal and deception, Cal found himself thinking that some discoveries led not to loss, but to unexpected possibilities. Not to endings, but to beginnings that no one could have anticipated. The tactical communication device crackled to life at 5:30 a.m. Friday morning. Its military-grade encryption, ensuring that their conversations couldn't be intercepted by the same surveillance network they were preparing to expose, Cal had retrieved it from storage the night before, along with other equipment from his Army days that he had hoped never to use again in civilian life. "Team Alpha in position," came Margaret Chon's voice through the secure channel. The attorney had arrived at her downtown office before dawn, preparing legal documents that would need to be filed simultaneously across multiple jurisdictions to prevent Victor from fleeing or destroying evidence. Team Beta ready, responded Detective Sarah Rodriguez from the NYPD's White-Collar Crime Unit. Margaret had convinced her to take the case based on the evidence they had compiled, and Rodriguez had assembled a small team of investigators who specialized in corporate espionage and fraud. Cal adjusted his earpiece and looked across the security office at Evelyn, who was reviewing the final details of their plan with the focused intensity of a general preparing for battle. In 18 hours, Victor's engagement party would begin, and by then, they needed to have neutralized his ability to use the fraudulent marriage contract or the surveillance recordings against her. The most dangerous part is going to be the next few hours, Cal said, checking his watch. If Victor suspects that we've discovered his plan, he could accelerate his timeline and try to activate the contract provisions before we're ready to counter them. Evelyn nodded, her business training evident in the way she approached their situation as a complex strategic problem requiring careful coordination and precise timing. He's expecting me to meet him at 10 a.m. to review final arrangements for tomorrow's party. I need to behave normally, show no signs that anything has changed. I'll be monitoring from here, Cal assured her. The building's legitimate security cameras will cover most of your route, and I'll have audio contact through the comm system. If anything feels wrong, if Victor says or does anything that suggests he knows about our investigation, abort the meeting immediately. Sam appeared in the doorway of the security office, dressed for school, but moving with the careful attention of a child who had sensed that something important was happening. He had been unusually quiet during breakfast, asking fewer questions than usual, but watching his father with the acute awareness that children develop when their world feels unstable. Dad? Sam's voice was small but steady. Are you going to be okay today? Cal knelt down to his son's eye level, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders with a gentle firmness that had sustained them through 4 years of navigating life together. I'm going to be fine, Sam. Ms. Locke and I are working together to solve a problem. And sometimes solving problems takes courage and careful planning. Like when astronauts have to fix something on the space station? Sam asked his 10-year-old, mind reaching for analogies that made sense of adult complexities. Exactly like that, Cal smiled. Astronauts practice their procedures over and over. They work as a team, and they help each other stay safe. That's what we're doing. Evelyn watched this exchange with an expression that Cal couldn't quite interpret, something that might have been longing or recognition, or perhaps the realization that genuine care looked different from the manufactured affection she had experienced with Victor. Sam, Evelyn said gently, your father is one of the bravest people I've ever met. He's helping me because it's the right thing to do, even though it's difficult and potentially dangerous. You should be very proud of him. Sam nodded solemnly, then surprised them both by walking over to Evelyn and offering her one of his drawings, crayon rendering of a space station orbiting Earth, with stick figures visible through the windows. This is for you, he said simply. In case you need to remember that people can work together to fix problems, even when they're far from home. Evelyn accepted the drawing with hands that trembled slightly, clearly moved by the gesture. Thank you, Sam. I'll treasure this. After Sam left for school, Cal and Evelyn spent the morning reviewing their timeline and contingencies. At 9:15, Detective Rodriguez checked in with an update on the legal preparations. We've got arrest warrants ready for Victor Halle and 3 associates at Meridian Analytics, she reported through the comm system. The DA's office has reviewed your evidence and agrees that we have sufficient grounds for charges of fraud, conspiracy, and violation of electronic surveillance laws. What about the marriage contract? Evelyn asked. Margaret's filing a motion to have it declared invalid based on fraud and coercion, Rodriguez replied. With the evidence you've provided, showing how your signature was obtained through deception, the court should grant an emergency injunction, preventing Victor from using it to claim any control over your business interests. At 9:45, Evelyn prepared to leave for her meeting with Victor, but Cal caught her arm as she reached the door. "Evelyn," he said quietly, using her first name with an intimacy that had developed naturally over their days of working together. "I need you to know that whatever happens today, these past few days have meant more to me than I know how to express. You've shown Sam and me a different way of thinking about trust and courage." "Cal," she replied, her voice thick with emotion, "you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever, the ability to believe that someone could care about me without wanting something in return. Whatever Victor was trying to steal from me, you've helped me discover something more valuable." The moment stretched between them, heavy with implications and possibilities that would have to wait until they had navigated the immediate crisis. And Evelyn straightened her shoulders, transformed herself back into the composed businesswoman who could negotiate million-dollar deals without revealing her emotions, and walked out to meet the man who had spent a year trying to destroy her. Cal watched her go, then settled into the security office to monitor her progress through the building's camera system. The tactical communication device hummed quietly on his desk, connecting him to the team of professionals who were coordinating the most important day of their fort. Investigation. At 10:03, Evelyn's voice came through his earpiece, calm and controlled. "Despite the circumstances, I'm entering the restaurant now. Victor is already here, seated at our usual table by the windows." "Copy that," Cal responded. "I have visual on the restaurant's exterior camera. Remember, act natural, follow the script we rehearsed, and trust your instincts." For the next 30 minutes, Cal monitored Evelyn's meeting through the audio feed, listening as she and Victor discussed final arrangements for the engagement party with the practiced ease of a couple who had been planning the event for months. Victor seemed relaxed, confident, showing no signs that he suspected their investigation. But at 10:35, something changed in Victor's tone, a subtle shift that made Cal's military instincts sharpen with alarm. "Darling," Victor was saying, "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday regarding the building's security upgrades. I'm wondering if perhaps you've been taking those concerns a bit too seriously." "What do you mean?" Evelyn's voice remained steady, but Cal could hear a tension beneath her composed exterior. "Well, I noticed that you've been spending quite a bit of time with that security guard Cal, isn't it? Some of the building staff have mentioned seeing you together in areas that residents don't usually visit. I hope you're not developing any inappropriate attachments." Cal felt his blood run cold. Victor was fishing, testing Evelyn's reactions to see if their relationship had evolved beyond professional necessity. The question revealed that Victor had been watching them, possibly even surveilling their investigation. "Cal has been very professional in addressing my security concerns," Evelyn replied carefully. "I appreciate thoroughness in matters that affect my safety." "Of course, darling. I'm sure he's been very thorough." Victor's tone carried implications that made Cal's hands clench into fists. "I just want to make sure that you're not allowing gratitude to cloud your judgment about appropriate boundaries between employers and employees." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, but Cal could sense that Victor was probing, looking for signs that Evelyn's loyalties had shifted, or that she had discovered information that could threaten his plans. When the meeting finally ended, Cal felt like he had been holding his breath for an hour. "He knows," Evelyn said as soon as she was clear of the restaurant. "He may not know exactly what we've discovered, but he suspects that our relationship has changed. We need to accelerate our timeline." Cal was already reaching for the tactical communicator. "All teams, this is Team Leader. We're moving to Phase 2 immediately. Victor Halle is showing signs of awareness. Initiate arrest procedures now." The response was immediate and coordinated. Detective Rodriguez and her team moved toward Victor's office building, while Margaret Chun filed emergency motions with the court. Cal and Evelyn had less than 2 hours to reach the police station and provide testimony that would support the arrest warrants. As they prepared to leave Skycrest Towers, possibly for the last time as employee and resident, Cal found himself thinking about the tactical communication device that had coordinated their operation. It represented everything he had learned about leadership, teamwork, and protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. But more than that, it represented the moment when he had stopped being just a security guard observing other people's lives and had become someone willing to fight for principles that mattered more than his own safety. In helping Evelyn expose Victor's deception, Cal had rediscovered the sense of purpose that had sustained him through military service and could now sustain him through whatever challenges lay ahead. The battle was about to begin, but for the first time in days, Cal felt confident that they were fighting for something worth winning. The surveillance monitor in the police station conference room displayed a grid of 12 screens, each showing different angles of the hidden cameras that had been recording Evelyn's private life for months. Detective Rodriguez had connected the seized equipment to create a comprehensive view of Victor's surveillance network, and the effect was both impressive and deeply disturbing. "This is more sophisticated than most law enforcement operations," Rodriguez observed, adjusting the display to highlight the camera positioned in Evelyn's private office. Professional-grade equipment, military-level encryption, redundant recording systems. Whoever planned this had significant resources and technical expertise. Cal studied the monitor array with the analytical eye of someone who had coordinated surveillance operations in combat zones. The positioning is strategic, not random. Every camera is placed to capture specific types of information: business conversations, personal phone calls, meetings with advisors. This wasn't voyeurism. It was corporate espionage elevated to the level of psychological warfare. Evelyn sat at the conference table, surrounded by evidence of her violated privacy. But her demeanor was that of a CEO preparing for the most important board meeting of her career. The initial shock and betrayal had crystallized into focused determination to see justice done. Victor should be arriving at his office within the next 15 minutes, she said, checking her watch. He has a 2 p.m. meeting with investors from Meridian Analytics to discuss the final details of their acquisition strategy. Perfect timing, Rodriguez replied. We'll arrest him in front of his co-conspirators, which should encourage cooperation. When we start questioning them about the scope of this operation, the tactical communication device crackled with an update from the surveillance team positioned outside Victor's downtown office building. Target approaching the building now. Black sedan, 2 passengers. Victor Hawley, an unidentified male, possibly his attorney. Cal felt his pulse quicken as the operation moved into its most critical phase. For 3 days, they had been gathering evidence and building their case. Now they would discover whether their preparation was sufficient to neutralize Victor's ability to destroy Evelyn's life and business. There's something you should know, Evelyn said quietly, addressing both Cal and Detective Rodriguez. I've been thinking about Victor's reaction when he realizes we've discovered his plan. He's not the type of man who accepts defeat gracefully. If he can't control Locke Industries through the marriage contract, he may try to damage the company in other ways. What kind of damage? Rodriguez asked. The surveillance recordings contain confidential business information that could be released to competitors or the media. Stock manipulation, insider trading accusations, corporate espionage. Victor could orchestrate a campaign designed to destroy the company's reputation and tank its stock price. Evelyn's business training allowed her to anticipate the various ways her enemies might attack. Even if the accusations were eventually disproven, the damage to investor confidence could take years to repair. Cal understood the implications immediately. He could use the engagement party as a platform for maximum public impact. 300 guests, including reporters and business leaders, all gathered to celebrate what they believe is a romantic engagement. If Victor were to make public accusations at the party, claiming that Evelyn had betrayed his trust or violated business ethics, the scandal would dominate news coverage for weeks. That's why we need to arrest him before the party begins, Rodriguez said firmly. Once he's in custody, we can seize his devices and prevent him from releasing any information that could harm Ms. Locke or her company. The communication device buzzed with another update. Target has entered the building. We have visual confirmation through lobby security cameras, proceeding to the 32nd floor. Rodriguez stood and checked her service weapon, then looked at Cal and Evelyn with the professional confidence of someone who had conducted dozens of similar operations. This is where you two step back and let law enforcement handle the rest. You've provided excellent evidence and intelligence, but the actual arrest needs to be conducted by trained officers. I understand, Cal replied, though part of him wanted to be present when Victor finally faced consequences for his actions. We'll wait here for your confirmation that he's in custody. As Rodriguez and her team left for Victor's office, Cal and Evelyn found themselves alone in the conference room, surrounded by monitors displaying the evidence of systematic surveillance and betrayal. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of everything they had discovered and everything that would change once Victor was arrested. Cal, Evelyn said softly, I want you to know that regardless of what happens with the legal proceedings, I meant what I said about offering you a position with Locke Industries. You've shown skills and integrity that would be valuable in any organization. And I want you to know that helping you has been the most meaningful work I've done since leaving the Army, Cal replied. Not just because of the investigation, but because it reminded me what it feels like to fight for someone worth protecting. Their conversation was interrupted by urgent voices from the tactical communicator. Rodriguez's voice cut through the static with professional urgency. We have a problem. Victor Hawley is not in his office. According to building security, he never made it to the 32nd floor. We think he may have detected our surveillance and changed his plans. Cal felt his stomach drop as the implications became clear. If Victor had realized that law enforcement was closing in, he would likely accelerate his own timeline, possibly moving to activate the fraudulent marriage contract or release damaging information about Evelyn before he could be arrested. Where could he have gone? Evelyn asked, though her expression suggested she was already formulating possibilities. Somewhere he feels secure, somewhere he has access to the surveillance recordings and the ability to communicate with his associates. Cal replied, his military training helping him think like someone planning a defensive operation. Somewhere. He can control the narrative if he decides to go public with accusations against you. The realization hit them both simultaneously, and Evelyn's face went pale with understanding. Skycrest Towers, she whispered. He's going to my penthouse. He still has access codes, and he knows the surveillance equipment better than anyone. If he's going to make a stand, he'll do it in the place where he has the most leverage. Cal was already reaching for his security radio, but his call to the building's main desk went unanswered. Either the day shift was away from their posts, or Victor had already neutralized the building's security systems. We need to get back there immediately, Evelyn said, gathering her purse and phone. If Victor is in my penthouse, he has access to backup copies of all the surveillance recordings. He could be uploading them to news outlets or sending them to business competitors right now. The surveillance monitor continued displaying its grid of camera feeds, but now those images looked less like evidence and more like a warning. Somewhere in the city, Victor Hawley was moving to implement contingency plans that could destroy everything they had worked to protect. As Cal and Evelyn prepared to race back to Skycrest Towers, the tactical communicator crackled with Detective Rodriguez's voice, carrying an urgency that made Cal's military instincts sharpen with alarm. All units, be advised that we've lost contact with the building's security desk. Repeat, no response from Skycrest Tower security. Possible hostile situation in progress. The battle they had been preparing for was about to begin, but the battlefield had shifted to the place where it all started, the building where Cal had first spotted a tiny red light and decided that some violations of trust demanded a response. regardless of the personal cost. The deleted camera footage flickered across Victor's laptop screen as Cal and Evelyn emerged from the service elevator into the penthouse hallway, moving with the careful silence that Cal's military training had made second nature. Victor had been so focused on his desperate attempt to recover and transmit the surveillance recordings that he hadn't heard the soft chime of the elevator arriving at the 63rd floor. Through the partially open door of Evelyn's office, they could see Victor hunched over multiple devices, his laptop, tablet, and phone all working simultaneously to upload files to various cloud storage services and anonymous email accounts. The man who had spent a year presenting himself as the perfect fiancé now looked haggard and desperate, his expensive suit wrinkled, his carefully styled hair disheveled from running his hands through it. "He's trying to salvage whatever he can," Cal whispered, noting the scattered papers and portable hard drives that suggested Victor had been working frantically to preserve evidence of his surveillance operation. If he can get even a portion of those recordings to his associates or the media, he can still damage our reputation even from prison. Evelyn nodded, her face set with the determined expression of someone who had spent years making difficult business decisions under pressure. "We need to stop him before he completes those uploads. Some of those files contain information that could destroy not just me, but other people who trusted me with their confidential communications." Cal assessed their tactical situation with the methodical approach he had learned during 2 combat tours. Victor was positioned behind Evelyn's desk, which gave him cover but also limited his escape routes. The office had only one entrance, which meant they could control his access to the rest of the penthouse. Most importantly, Victor appeared to be alone. His associates had either fled when they realized law enforcement was closing in, or they had never been part of this final desperate gambit. "Victor," Evelyn called out, stepping into the doorway with the authoritative presence she brought to board meetings and investor presentations. "It's over. The police know everything. The surveillance, the fraudulent contract, the conspiracy. With Meridian Analytics, we have evidence of all of it." Victor's head snapped up from his laptop screen, his face cycling through surprise, anger, and calculation as he processed their presence. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the charm and warmth that had characterized his courtship of Evelyn. "Evelyn, darling," he said, the endearment now sounding like mockery. "I was hoping you wouldn't discover my work until after our beautiful engagement party tomorrow. But I suppose it's fitting that you're here for the conclusion of our relationship." "There is no relationship," Evelyn replied coldly. "There never was. Everything you told me, everything you made me feel, was a lie designed to steal my company." Victor laughed, a sound devoid of humor or warmth. "Steal? I prefer to think of it as a strategic acquisition. You were naive enough to believe that someone could love you for yourself rather than your $800 million inheritance. That kind of naivety makes you unfit to run a major corporation." Cal stepped into the room beside Evelyn, his presence clearly surprising Victor, who had dismissed him as irrelevant throughout their brief previous encounters. "The security guard," Victor said with disdain. "I should have known you were the one helping her discover my cameras. Though I have to admire your timing. You're about to be unemployed when Locke Industries changes ownership." "The only thing changing is your address," Cal replied evenly. "From a penthouse to a prison cell. Detective Rodriguez and her team are on their way up here right now." Victor's expression shifted to something more dangerous, the mask of civilized behavior finally slipping completely. "You think you've won? You think arresting me will solve Evelyn's problems?" He gestured toward the devices scattered across the desk. "I've been uploading files for the past 2 hours. Business conversations, personal phone calls, private meetings with her therapist. All of it will be in the hands of journalists and competitors within minutes." "We anticipated that," Evelyn said, pulling out her phone to show Victor the screen. "My IT security team has been monitoring your upload attempts. Every file you've tried to send has been intercepted and deleted before reaching its destination. The FBI's cybercrime unit is very good at what they do. For the first time, Victor's confidence cracked, revealing the panic beneath his calculated exterior. That's impossible. I used encrypted channels, anonymous servers. You used equipment that my company's security division had been tracking since we discovered your surveillance network. Evelyn continued. Every device, every account, every digital footprint you've created over the past year has been mapped and monitored. We know about your associates at Meridian Analytics, your offshore bank accounts, and your contingency plans. Cal watched Victor process this information, seeing the moment when the man realized that his elaborate scheme had been completely unraveled. But instead of surrender, Victor's expression hardened with the desperate resolve of someone who had nothing left to lose. If I can't have the company, then I'll make sure you can't have it either, Victor snarled, reaching for what appeared to be a dead man's switch connected to his laptop. I may not be able to upload the files manually, but I can release them all simultaneously through a pre-programmed system that will send everything to every major news outlet in the country. Victor, don't. Evelyn started, but Cal was already moving, his military training taking over as he recognized the immediate threat. Cal crossed the office in 3 quick strides, tackling Victor away from the desk before he could activate whatever final malicious program he had prepared. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of expensive suit fabric and determination, fighting for control of the device that could destroy Evelyn's reputation and company with a single command. The struggle was brief but intense. Victor was younger and desperate, but Cal had years of combat training and the focused strength that came from protecting someone he cared about. Within moments, he had Victor pinned to the floor, the dead man's switch safely out of reach. It's over, Cal said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced down more dangerous enemies than a corporate fraudster having a breakdown. You lost the moment you decided to build your success on lies and exploitation. The sound of elevator doors opening in the hallway announced the arrival of Detective Rodriguez and her team, their voices calling out as they secured the penthouse and prepared to take Victor into custody. As the police flooded into the office, Cal helped Evelyn gather the evidence scattered across her desk devices and documents that represented months of systematic violation of her privacy and trust. Ms. Locke, Detective Rodriguez said as her officers placed Victor in handcuffs, we'll need you both to come to the station to provide formal statements. But I can tell you that Mr. Halle will be facing charges of conspiracy, fraud, electronic surveillance violations, and attempted corporate espionage. With the evidence you've provided, he's looking at significant prison time. As Victor was led away, he made one final attempt to maintain his facade of superiority. You think you've saved your precious company, Evelyn? Wait until the board discovers that you've been conducting a romantic relationship with a security guard. They'll question your judgment, your fitness to lead. Actually, Evelyn interrupted, her voice carrying the cool authority that had made her one of the youngest CEOs in the Fortune 500. I think the board will be impressed that I was able to identify and neutralize a threat to corporate security with the help of someone whose loyalty and integrity are beyond question. Cal will be receiving a commendation for his service to the company, along with a significant promotion. The last thing Victor saw as he was escorted from the penthouse was Cal and Howleth, Evelyn standing together in the office where he had tried to destroy her life, surrounded by the failed remnants of his surveillance equipment and the evidence that would ensure his conviction. The deleted camera footage that Victor had been so desperate to recover would indeed be recovered by law enforcement, technicians who would use it as evidence in his prosecution. The files he had tried to weaponize against Evelyn would instead serve as proof of his crimes. Each recorded conversation, a testament to the systematic violation of trust that had defined their relationship. As the penthouse fell quiet again, Cal and Evelyn found themselves alone with the aftermath of a battle that had tested everything they believed about trust, courage, and the possibility of genuine connection in a world where everything could be surveilled and manipulated. They had won. Not just the legal victory over Victor's scheme, but something more important, the knowledge that authentic relationships could survive and even flourish when built on truth rather than deception, on mutual respect rather than exploitation, on the simple revolutionary idea that some people could be trusted completely, even when the stakes were higher than either of them had ever imagined. The new security badge felt different in Cal's hand, heavier somehow, though that was probably just the weight of everything it represented. 6 months after Victor's arrest, the plastic card that had once identified him as a night security guard now bore the title Director of Corporate Security, Locke Industries, along with access privileges that would have seemed impossible when he first discovered that tiny red light blinking in Evelyn's hallway. "Dad, are you nervous?" Sam asked, adjusting his tie with the careful attention of a 10-year-old who had been practicing the motion for weeks. They were standing in the lobby of Skycrest Towers, but today the elegant space was decorated for celebration rather than investigation. Flowers and champagne tables, arranged for the informal reception Evelyn had planned to introduce Cal to the company's board of directors and senior executives. "A little," Cal admitted, though his nervousness had less to do with the corporate politics of his new position and more to do with the speech he had prepared for the occasion. But good nervous. The kind you feel when something important is about to begin. Sam nodded solemnly, understanding his father's moods with the intuitive accuracy that had developed over 6 years of navigating life together. "Like how I felt before my Jupiter presentation?" "Exactly like that," Cal smiled, remembering the morning when Sam had practiced his astronomy report while they unknowingly stood on the edge of discovering Victor's surveillance network. So much had changed since then, but some things remained constant: Sam's curiosity about the world, his artistic talent, and his ability to find wonder in both rockets and castles. The boy's latest drawing was framed on the wall of Cal's new office on the 45th floor, a crayon masterpiece depicting a security guard and an astronaut working together to repair a space station. Beside it hung a photograph from the previous month's company picnic, showing Cal, Evelyn, and Sam standing together in front of a lake, looking like a family that had grown together naturally, rather than one forged in the aftermath of corporate espionage and betrayal. "Mr. Grant?" A young woman approached with the professional courtesy of someone accustomed to managing executive schedules. "Ms. Locke asked me to let you know that the board members have arrived, and she's ready to begin the introductions whenever you are." Cal straightened his tie, a silk creation that Sam had helped him select because it reminded them both of the deep blue of space, and walked toward the conference room where Evelyn was waiting. Through the glass walls, he could see the 12 men and women who oversaw Locke Industries' operations, their faces carrying the measured attention of people accustomed to evaluating leadership potential. Evelyn stood at the head of the table, radiating the quiet confidence that had impressed Cal from their first conversation 6 months ago. But now he understood that her strength came not from isolation or self-reliance, but from the knowledge that she was surrounded by people who had proven their loyalty through actions rather than words. "Ladies and gentlemen," Evelyn began, her voice carrying the authority that had made her one of the most respected CEOs in the shipping industry, "I'd like you to meet Cal Grant, our new Director of Corporate Security." Over the past 6 months, Cal has demonstrated exactly the kind of analytical thinking, ethical standards, and protective instincts that our company needs in today's complex business environment. The introductions proceeded smoothly, with board members asking thoughtful questions about Cal's background and his vision for protecting Locke Industries from the kinds of sophisticated threats that Victor's conspiracy had represented. Cal found himself drawing on his military experience, his years of security work, and his recent education in corporate espionage to articulate strategies for safeguarding both the company's physical assets and its intellectual property. "Grant," asked Dorothy Chun, the board's longest-serving member and Margaret's sister. What would you say is the most important lesson you learned from the Victor Hawley situation? Cal considered the question carefully, thinking about surveillance cameras and fraudulent contracts, about encrypted hard drives and tactical communication devices, about the moment when he had to choose between job security and doing what was right. I learned that the most dangerous threats often come from people who understand our vulnerabilities better than we do ourselves, he replied. Victor Hall succeeded initially because he studied Ms. Locke's life, her business practices, and her personal relationships with the thoroughness of someone planning a military operation. He turned her trust into a weapon against her. And how do we defend against that kind of attack? Asked another board member. We build systems based on transparency rather than secrecy, on multiple layers of verification rather than single points of trust. But most importantly, we create an environment where people feel empowered to speak up when they notice something wrong, even if that something involves people in positions of authority. Cal looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. The only reason we discovered Victor's surveillance network was because I was willing to risk my job to warn Ms. Locke, and she was willing to trust someone outside her usual social circle with information that could have destroyed her. The meeting continued for another hour, with discussions about budget allocations, staffing requirements, and coordination with law enforcement agencies. But Cal found himself most energized by conversations about corporate culture, about creating an organization where ethical behavior was rewarded and where employees felt safe reporting concerns without fear of retaliation. When the formal business concluded, the group moved to the lobby for the reception, where Evelyn had arranged for, catering from the same restaurant where she and Cal had shared their first meal with Sam 6 months ago. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. This wasn't just a corporate function, but a celebration of relationships that had developed through shared challenges and mutual respect. Cal, Evelyn said, approaching him as he stood near the windows. Overlooking the city, there's something I want to give you. She handed him a small wrapped package, and when he opened it, he found a silver picture frame containing a photograph he had never seen before. It showed the building's original security office, taken during his first week of employment 3 years ago. But what made the picture special was the margin note in Evelyn's handwriting. For the man who saw what others missed and had the courage to act on what he saw. I had building management dig this out of their archives, Evelyn explained. I wanted to remember where we started, before we knew that a simple conversation about security concerns would change both our lives so completely. Cal studied the photograph, remembering the man he had been 3 years ago, recently widowed, struggling to build a stable life for Sam, working a job that paid the bills but offered little hope for advancement. That man could never have imagined standing in a corporate reception as director of security, surrounded by board members and executives who respected his judgment and valued his contributions. Evelyn, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. When I first discovered those cameras, my primary concern was doing my job correctly and protecting my income. I didn't set out to be heroic or to change anyone's life. I know, she replied, her smile carrying the warmth that had first attracted him to her, back when he was still trying to convince himself that their relationship was purely professional. That's what made your actions so meaningful. You did the right thing, not because you expected a reward, but because your conscience wouldn't let you do anything else. Across the lobby, Sam was engaged in animated conversation with Dorothy Chun about space exploration and planetary geology. His enthusiasm infectious, even among board members who were more accustomed to discussing quarterly earnings than Jupiter's moons. Watching his son navigate this new world with confidence and curiosity, Cal felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with career advancement or financial security. We should probably think about heading home, Cal said, noting the time. Sam has school tomorrow. and I want to review the final security assessment reports before my first department meeting. Actually, Evelyn said, her expression carrying a hint of the mischief that had emerged as their relationship deepened. I was hoping you and Sam might join me for dinner tonight. I've been experimenting with a new pasta recipe, and I could use honest critics. Cal looked at her standing in the lobby of the building where they had first met, where she had trusted him with her safety, despite having every reason to maintain professional distance. 6 months ago, Evelyn Locke had been the untouchable heiress who owned his world. Now she was the woman who helped Sam with his homework, who remembered that Cal preferred his coffee black, who had somehow become essential to their small families. Happiness. We'd love to, Cal said, meaning it completely. As they gathered Sam and prepared to leave Skycrest Towers, Cal caught sight of his reflection in the lobby's mirrored walls. The man looking back at him wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had earned his position through competence and integrity. But more importantly, he was accompanied by people who had chosen to share their lives with him, not because of what he could provide or what he represented, but because of who he was when everything else was stripped away. The new security badge in his pocket represented more than just a job title or access privileges. It represented the knowledge that some violations of trust demanded a response, that some people were worth fighting for, and that genuine connection could flourish even in a world where everything seemed designed to keep people isolated and suspicious of each other's motives. Outside, the city sparkled with lights that looked different from ground level than they had from the security office, where Cal had spent so many quiet hours wondering about the lives being lived in the spaces between buildings. Now he knew that those lives were filled with the same hopes and fears, dreams and disappointments that had always defined human experience. But he also knew that occasionally, if people were willing to take risks for each other, those individual lives could intersect in ways that created something larger and more meaningful than any of them could have achieved alone. As they walked toward the car that would take them home to Evelyn's penthouse, which had been transformed from a surveillance target into a sanctuary, where Sam's drawings hung beside corporate security reports, and where 3 people had learned to trust each other completely. Cal felt the deep satisfaction of someone who had discovered that the most important security system wasn't built from cameras and access codes, but from the simple revolutionary act of choosing to believe in each other's fundamental decency, even when the stakes were higher than anyone had ever imagined.